Alright, in this video I'm gonna give you a quick introduction into Maya and its interface. So let's begin with the basics, and in order to be able to navigate the viewport right here, you can either use this box that will either move your viewport to different either perspective or orthographic based viewports. Okay, but if you really want to navigate Maya rather than having to use this, make sure you're using if you're using a PC, hold Alt. If you're using a Mac, use the Command key, and while holding the Alt or Command, if you left click, you can rotate around your viewport. If you right click, you can pan forward and backwards, and if you use your middle mouse, you can move around your canvas like this. Alright, so knowing how to move around your viewport is pretty important. Second thing we're going to look into is how to create virtual geometry to be able to manipulate here. So we're going to look into our menu set over here. Alright, now Maya has different menu sets that you can kind of be working from. So depending on what you're doing, you're gonna need to be in a different menu set. Since we're gonna be talking basic modeling techniques, we're gonna be in polygons. All right. So click on that, and but notice that a lot of this menu kind of stays is gonna stay the same if depending on the mode, but some of these are gonna change. So if I change this from polygons to animation, notice that it's going to give me different options. So this is why it's important to make sure that you're on the right mode when you're working under modeling. Okay. So if you want to create a virtual geometry or what's called primitives, you would have to go to your Create menu button. Okay. Now, what I like to do sometimes is to detach it, so I can actually have this available on my viewport. So when you click on it, you see it has this dotted line, so just click on it and you can actually kind of move it around or place it whatever you want on your viewport. So Maya has a couple different types of primitive geometry that you can kind of work with. We're going to start with with polygon primitives. So I'm going to click on their cube. Alright, and nice thing about Maya is that it usually kind of gives you instructions on what to say, what to do. So basically it's telling you to drag on the viewport, and that's your first click, and then you're going to do a second click to actually give it a little bit of height. Okay. Now by default, Maya is going to give you this kind of see-through kind of wireframe mode, and in order to change that, if you look at your menu sets right here on your viewport, there's a couple of different modes that you can change into. Again, by default this is wireframe. If you click on the smooth shade all, it's going to give you this default kind of gray shading that everything that's in Maya kind of comes with. And if you want to if you like shortcuts, rather than clicking on these, you can switch. You can actually use the number on the top of your keyboard. So if I click on 4, it goes back to this wireframe, and if I click on 5, it's going to give me this shaded mode. Okay. And again, I'm kind of moving around the viewport by using the shortcuts I mentioned before. So Alt or Command left click to rotate, Alt right click to pan back and forth, and Alt middle mouse click to actually move your canvas around. The next thing that's very important in Maya is knowing how to manipulate your primitive geometry in your viewport. You're going to see a bunch of tools here on your left that are going to allow you to move this geometry. So if you click on your move tool, it's going to give you this pivot, which pretty much gives you I guess the the directions in which this primitive object can move in this 3D space. So if you click on the arrows and hold them while you're moving, you can actually translate them around your viewport. Alright, you can also move them up and down. And if you just want to undo what you just did originally, you can just click on the Z key as many times as you need to and just go back to your original position. And I just undid my primitive. Now, when you're creating primitives, and again, notice that a lot of these kind of submenus have these kind of dotted lines. So even if I want to stick to just polygons, I can just go in here and deattach that and close everything else. So I'm just going to close this. There are two ways of creating primitives. One of them is just by clicking on it and then dragging your geometry on your viewport. The second way, it's by let's see. By selecting the primitive and then clicking on your viewport, but notice that it's actually pretty tiny. And the reason for that, it's because of the default settings that your Maya comes with. So if you want a perfect square and you don't want to draw it out yourself by just dragging in the viewport, click on this box right next to the cube and it's going to give you the options of that specific primitive. So this is pretty much telling me that if I were to create a cube on a viewport, just by clicking once on it, it's going to give me a cube that has these measurements in millimeters. And again, this is way too small. So let me just change these tool settings to something different, something like 10 to each one. Then I'm going to click on my viewport and it's going to create a cube that's exactly the measurements that I just created, that I just set for it. And again, you find those tool menus by actually clicking on these boxes. Alright, so as far as the tool settings go, again, this one is your move tool. This is going to be your rotation tool, which is going to allow you to rotate on the axis. Alright, and then you also have a scale tool. Alright, now sometimes in 3D programs it's a lot more effective to just use shortcuts. So if you want to use your move tool, click on W and that will select your move tool. If you want to rotate, click on E and that's your shortcut for rotation. If you want to scale, that's R and that's going to be your shortcut. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this and I'm just going to go here and create a sphere. Again, these are a bunch of different type of primitives. And again, I'm just going to create a couple here on my viewport. Cylinder. One of the things that you need to keep in mind with these is that all of these have attributes that you can actually find in the channel box, which is this box that you're going to find right here. And if it's not there, make sure that you click on this one, this button right here at the corner. Now, if you're in the channel box and you click on an object, it's going to give you certain information about that object. One of it is basically where in the in your viewport is located. So for a specific location of this square is actually at this location. Now, another thing that you can do here in your channel box is you can actually manipulate these numbers to move it into a different location. So for instance, something to keep in mind is that 0, 0, 0 or XYZ 0 is always going to be at the center of your viewport right here. So if I wanted to take my object and make sure to move it to that specific location, I could try and do it like this, or I could go in here and just type 0 on all of them and it's going to center it right when I need to. Now keep in mind that it's moving this virtual 3D object based on the location on this pivot. Okay, And again, this pivot is these arrows that allow you to manipulate the location of this virtual object. Now, besides location information, you can also change the rotation of it. Okay. And again, these are just random numbers. But again, the idea is that through your channel box, you can always go back to your default position just by going back and typing 0 on all of them. And you can actually do the same thing with scale. Again, if you want to scale things uniformly, you usually want to keep all of these numbers in the same amount. And if you want to do it uniformly, you can just add scale number to the different axes. Alright, and again, I can just go back and make sure to put this on default. Oh, sorry, default is 1 for all of these, and I can just put this one back to 0. But again, keep in mind that all these manipulations that you're doing through the channel box are based on the position of this pivot. But know that you can also actually change the location of this pivot, so you can manipulate the location, rotation, and scale based on a different position. So let's see. If you hold the D key, all right, it's going to change the pivot into this type of arrow. Notice that it doesn't allow you to kind of move it on the X or YZ axis. It just kind of changes the middle of it. This means that you can actually manipulate the location of this pivot. So if I go in here and change it to somewhere outside of my object, notice that the location of my object is now based on the location of the new location of this pivot. So if I'm changing the position of it, is going to be based on that one. If I change the rotation of it, notice that it's rotating based on the position of that pivot. And if I change the scale of it, it's going to be based on that axis as well. And again, let me just go ahead and do that. Now, if you want to again change the position of your pivot, usually what helps is using your snapping tools, and you're gonna find these under this tab right here. Another thing that you can find under this section is your sub-object modes. But again, I'll cover these in a second. So if I wanted to change the location of my pivot to, let's say, the location of this vertex right here, what I would do it's while holding the D key, again, you need to hold it to be able to manipulate the pivot. Make sure you go here and click on the magnet tool that has on this snapping tool that has the magnet and this vertex. So if you click on it, notice that it's going to be snapping to the different vertices of our object, but we want it actually right here. So now that I changed the location, again, notice that it's now the position of it is also going to be based on your snapping tool. So you need to make sure you need to click that off so that doesn't affect the location of it. But again, notice that any rotation or scale is now based on the new position of my pivot. Alright, so let me just center my pivot back to that. Another thing, let's see. In your channel box, again, we already covered that you can go in here and just type in different increments that you want. And you know that if you want it back at 0, all you have to do is change the numbers here. You can also increase the numbers of this, let's say this translate C, without having to actually type the numbers in. So I'm selecting this specific axis for the translate, stepping outside of my channel box, and just middle mouse clicking. And again, notice the numbers on my translate C are changing. So again, I select the axis that I want to change, and I go into my viewport and just middle mouse click, and that's going to allow me to move to increase whatever amount I want here by hand rather than having to type in the numbers. And again, just keep in mind that you can actually do the same with all of these. You can even select them all and do it at the same time. Alright. Alright, so we covered the moving tools, different primitives, how to manipulate the pivot, so you can manipulate the translation, rotation, and scale based on the position of your pivot. Another thing that's important is also from what viewport you're manipulating your objects from. So by default you have this perspective, but Maya also has options for views that don't have any perspective at all. They're what they're called orthographic. So if you press really hard on your spacebar, it's going to give you 4 different views. One of them is going to be looking at it from the top, and again, if I click on it, and again, notice that by default all of these are going to be under this wireframe shade. So if you want to change it to this one, you need to make sure you select that viewport and click on 5, or select this shaded mode. Alright, and then let's just do the same with all of these. And again, the important thing about these is that you are manipulating your object not from a perspective, but you're using orthographic that does not account for perspective at all. So in some instances it might be very useful for, and again, it just kind of really depends on what you're doing. Again, by pressing the space bar, we got this 4 different viewports here. If I press really hard, let's say on this right one, it's going to make this one a full screen. And I can always kind of press the space bar again and go back to this, switch to this one. Okay, another shortcut for this you can actually find on your tools, which will be this one. If you click on the panel layout, it's going to give you all 4. If you press on the panel layout for perspective, it's going to give you this one. Okay, so that's how to navigating into different types of viewports. Keep in mind, if you're using this box and you change it to a front viewport, this is a front viewport that's actually being it's affected by perspective as well. So if you want a true orthographic, you need to make sure to go to the right one, which would be this one. And again, notice the difference, because the grid on this one is actually showing perspective. This one is just a flat image. Okay, so let me go back to this. Another thing that I want to talk about right now, especially now that I introduce the spacebar to switch back and forth, is you're seeing a glimpse of this menu. And this is called a hotbox, and it's basically a shortcut to things that you can actually find in your menus, but it just kind of makes it easier for you to find right here. So if I wanted to create another primitive in my viewport, again, I could go to create and I could separate the tabs, or I can just press the space bar and then go to the create menu right here and do it through here. Let's just do prism. Okay. So that hotbox is a shortcut for all the different menus that you find under here. And again, it really depends on under what mode you are. Since we're in the polygon mode, you're going to see a lot of the different tools that you have for polygons here in your shortcut. Another thing that you can find in your hotbox, if you click on the Maya with your left click, it gives you a shortcut to the different viewports that you have. So if you don't want to use the spacebar shortcut to change between viewports, you can actually again click and hold the spacebar, left click under Maya, and just switch to the different viewport that you want. Okay. Another location to switch between these viewports, besides your tools right here, it's under panels, right on your viewport menu. So if you click under panels, Again, the first one you're going to find is perspective. Okay, but if you want to switch to the orthographic, again, these are the ones that don't have any perspective. You can just go to the orthographic and just choose any of these, again, depending on what you want. The next thing that I'm going to cover, we already covered how to, again, move around your viewport, how to create primitives, how to change different viewports, again, depending whether you want to work on something that has perspective or something that's orthographic. The next thing that you need to know how to do is how to manipulate the objects themselves. So if you select the object, you can actually manipulate the location of it and stuff like that. But you can also manipulate the subobject mode of it. It's going to allow you to manipulate the specific components of this primitive. So if I select my cube and I right click on it, it's going to give you the different components that this cube is made of. The first one is vertices, which are these points. Okay. Then we have edges, which are these. Alright. And last but not least, we have faces, which are these. Alright. And again, it gives you a couple different other options that I'm not going to cover right now. The other one that might be important is also this multi or multi, that allows you to select multiple multiple components at the same time. So I can select this face, this edge, and this vertex at the same time. Okay, but I'm going to go back to object mode. So by default, all things are object mode. And if you want to manipulate the components of this object, you need to right click on it and just choose the different components. Another thing that you should notice while I'm again, when you select a specific component, is that you can it gives you the pivot for that specific component. So you can go in there and you can actually manipulate it. Now if you're having what is happening right now with mine is that I'm moving one and it's moving another one. It's because there are settings in our move tool that are actually making it do that. So if your tools are doing something that you don't want them to do, you need to make sure to go into the tool settings of, for instance, my move tool. This is going to give you a couple of different things that that you can kind of change. Let's start with why you're seeing this kind of reflective movement, and it's because if you move down, you're going to see that under my reflection settings, my reflection is on. So I'm going to make sure to turn that off, and I'll go back to it a little bit later. But if you're having the same problem, it's because that reflection setting, it's on. Under your tool settings, again, it just kind of it gives you different options as far as how to manipulate this object. So you can base the movement of it based on the object itself. You can base it on the its location in the world. And again, as we're doing this right now, it doesn't really seem to be doing much. But let's add a little bit of rotation to my cube here. Okay. And again, if I go into world mode, notice that my pivot is actually based on the pivot of the world, and I'm able to manipulate my object on the XYZ axis of it, and it's as if it was actually not rotated at all. If I were to move this object, let's say on the direction that it's facing at, based on its rotation, I wouldn't be able to do it through the axis of the world. But if I change it to the object, notice that now the axis had changed, so the pivot is based on the location of the object, and I will be able to do that right now. Okay, so again, the location of your object, it's always based on your pivot, and the axis is it kind of all depends on your move settings. So if you want to move it based on the settings on the pivot or the axis of your object, make sure that's selected. If you want to base it on the world, make sure that's selected. And let me just go back to world. Gonna zero this out. Okay. Alright, so before I had to change my move tool settings, again we're talking about components, and again notice that now that I changed my settings to the object rather than world, or I think originally was in the normal average, is going to give you a completely different way to move this axis, so just keep those in mind. But again, selecting the specific component is going to give you a completely different axis that you can actually manipulate like this. Alright, so you can manipulate your geometry like that. You can also manipulate your edges. You can also manipulate your faces. Okay, so the next stage of primitive manipulation is to be able to add more geometry to your object. Okay, because again, usually any 3D object that you're creating in Maya is going to be based on some sort of primitive, and if you were to build a house out of this box, it doesn't really have enough geometry for it. So again, I'm just going to bring this up and just lay it there on the floor. If you want to ever add more geometry to your object, you need to go into your channel box, and under inputs you're going to have this polycube, and again this is going to hold a completely set of attributes that make up your cube. So if you click on it, notice that you have settings for the width of it, for the height, the depth, and also subdivisions. Alright, so you can actually add subdivisions on width, height, and depth here. And again, depending on what you're doing, usually having more resolution allows you to do things that you can't do without it. Alright. Now, the next level of manipulation, it's what you're going to find by actually using your mesh and edit mesh tools. And again, you're going to find this here in your menus. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the edit mesh and just going to separate that tab. Okay, and I'm just going to go through a couple of the tools that you're probably going to be using the most, okay, when it comes to trying to manipulate objects. So for instance, there's the extrude. So the way this one works is that you probably want to be in a component mode for this one, and let's say you want to extrude this face, and so I'm just selecting the face and I'm clicking under extrude. Alright, and it's going to give you a new kind of pivot that's going to allow you to create this different this extrusion. So now that it's changed, you can actually manipulate it, and you're creating more geometry by extruding out of that face. Okay. Now, with extrusion, you can do two things. One of them is extrude geometry like that. So again, if I wanted to do that, I'll just click on the extrude again, and I can do that. But another thing that you can do, again, notice that you're given also not only movement but scales tools. You can also kind of create a little bit of an inset like this, and then extrude one more time to create this type of detail. Alright, so that's the extrude tool. Now I'll cover bridge in a second. The next one I'm going to cover is the cut faces tool, and again, this one, it's a tool that you probably want to use under an orthographic, and again, orthographic means no perspective. And again, I'm going to click on it and I'm going to show you what it does. Alright, so notice that it created a cut on my geometry based on its location on the perspective viewport. All right, and again, let me just do it like this. And let me just undo it one more time. But let's say I wanted to create a division that went right down the middle here, and I could try maybe do it by manipulating my perspective viewport and just creating a cut like this, but it's not really going to go down the middle the way I want to. So that's where orthographic viewports come in. So I'm going to click on space bar, left click on my Maya, go into my front viewport, alright, and I'm going to use this cut tool to actually create a division right here. Alright, so again, notice that it actually went across the whole object, and it's pretty well parallel to what the other division that I have here. But usually, this tool is pretty messy, so you have to be kind of careful how you use it. And let me just undo that last cut. The next one is the interactive split tool. All right, and again, this one kind of allows you to kind of draw in your own cuts. And again, it's pretty interactive and intuitive at the same time, because as you're moving around, notice that it's kind of snapping to your edges and your vertices. So this one allows you to create more custom cuts like this. Okay, and again, it kind of all depends on what you're doing with it. Now I'm going to leave this as is for now, just so I can show you another tool later. But let's say I needed to create a detail that had this specific shape, and then we could come here and select these faces and extrude this out if we needed to. Alright, so again, the interactive split tool allows you to create this kind of more custom made cuts into your geometry. But again, this is a potentially messy tool, so you have to be very careful with how you divide your geometry. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to show you the flip triangle tool, and again, this one I'm going to show you how it works. I'm going to use the interactive split tool, and I'm just going to create a division between these two right here. Alright, and again, notice that it snapped right on the vertices that I have here and here. So if I were to use the flip triangle, it'll just switch it like this. And this can come in handy depending on what you're doing. Let's see. The next one I'm going to show you, it's the wedge face. And I think for this one, I'm just going to perhaps use a different box. So again, I'm going to... Now, keep in mind that Maya also has this thing called the shelf, which it's kind of like shortcuts to the most commonly used tools that you find in Maya. So if I want to find a primitive polygon square or a cube, I can go to create and find the cube right there. I can go to my hotbox, go to create, and find it here. Alright, or I could also go to my shelf right here under polygons, and there is a selection of different tools that I can actually find here, one of them being my cube. So I'm going to click on it, and it's going to allow me to create a cube right from it. Alright, so again, the shelf is usually a shortcut to the most commonly used tools that you find in Maya. And you can actually customize this, but I'll show you how to do that in a second, or in a different video actually. But let's go back to our edit mesh here, and I'm going to show you how to use the wedge face. So this one's one that requires two different kind of components to create. You need to select the face, you need an edge, and then when you click on wedge face, it does this. Okay, so again, notice that it took the face and then it kind of extruded based on the direction of the edge that you selected. So again, this kind of tool can be pretty handy if you're creating something like a vent on a roof or something like that. Let's see what else. Connect components. All right. If you wanted to connect this vertice and this vertice, and you didn't want to use the interactive split tool to actually draw it, you can actually select the vertex component, select them both, and just connect them. Okay. Let's see. So that's the connect. Now this set of tools right here allows you to kind of merge your vertices in the following fashion. So for instance, if I select these two vertices, and let's say I didn't want this to be like this, I actually need this shape here to be a triangle, you can actually click on merge and it will actually collapse them right to the middle. All right. If you wanted to merge, let's say this edge into this vertex right here, you will select the merge vertex tool and select the one that you want to merge, and then hold left click and just drag it to the vertex you want to kind of merge to, and it'll merge to that one. Alright, so again, the merge kind of just collapses everything down the center. If you want to merge a vertex or an edge to a specific location, you have to use the merge vertex tool for that. Now that I have I guess two pieces of complex geometry here, I'm going to show you what bridge does. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to delete a face from this one, and I deleted that face by selecting it and just clicking on delete. Alright, then I'm going to come here and I'm going to delete a face from here. Now what I want to do, it's basically bridge these two pieces of geometry right through these holes that I just created. Now the first thing that I need to do if I want to do that is to combine these objects. So now I'm gonna show you the mesh menu here. And if I wanted to take these two and turn them into one object, I would just click on combine. Alright, and again, notice now that if I select one, I select both of them. And if I wanted to bridge something, alright, I would just select these edges. And again, if I want to select all the edges of this hole right here, all I have to do is double click on that edge and it will actually follow and select all those four. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to hold shift so I can select multiple edges at the same time and just double click on that. And now that I have both of those selected, I'm just going to go here to bridge, and it just creates a piece of geometry that goes in between. Okay. And again, this piece of geometry, you can kind of again do the same thing that we've been doing to everything else. We can extrude it. Alright. Okay, I think one of the tools that I forgot to show you here is the insert edge loop tool. So again, I'm going to create another cube for this one. If you wanted to add divisions to a cube, and let's say you don't want to do it through your input here and just add subdivisions here. Well, let's just add a couple of divisions here. But let's just say that you wanted to add a very specific cut right here on the middle of it, or maybe here. And you select the insert edge loop tool. You can actually very interactively kind of insert a loop into that specific ring of edges. Alright, So again, this is a pretty intuitive tool when it comes to adding subdivision to the geometry. Alright, so we covered these set of tools that allow you to, add geometry to your tools, to your primitives by extruding or adding more loops. Same with this one. We went into the merging kind of objects. So again, if I wanted to collapse two vertices into one location, I would choose that. Now the bevel tool, and again, let me just go ahead and create another cube. This is one that is mostly used to actually give edges a little bit of curvature. Now, one thing that you got to keep in mind when you're modeling things in 3D is that nothing in the real world is a perfect object. Nothing has a perfect edge. So when we're modeling, we actually have to add a little bit of detail that kind of gives it a little bit of curvature that the objects in the real world would have. So for instance, if I had a perfect edge like this in my 3D model and I actually wanted to add a little bit of softness to that edge, I would select this face and then I will go to bevel. Alright, so notice it kind of took the edge and just kind of smoothed it out and split it. Now this is not exactly the look that I want for this specific bevel. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that when you do anything to these primitive objects, it actually keeps a history of what you do. So depending on the tool, your tools actually have attributes that you can kind of go in here and change as well. So if I wanted to change the offset of it so it's not as wide as what it originally was, I can come in here and change that. And if I want to add a couple more segments so it's smooth, I can do that there as well. Alright. So again, a lot of these tools have similar settings which you can actually go in there and manipulate. Alright, so just know you can do that. And again, that was the bevel tool. Now another thing that I'm going to go back to is the delete edge vertex. Now when I deleted the faces that I used right here to create this bridge, there was no how can I explain this? There was no leftovers, but the difference between faces and edges and vertices is that sometimes those edges leave kind of leftovers. So again, let me explain that by actually creating a little bit more geometry here. So I'm going to use the insert edge loop tool, and I'm going to create a loop that goes around my object like this. Alright, and again, it kind of went across the whole thing. Now if I wanted to get rid of those edges, I could click on the delete tool and it'll get rid of the edges. But if I go into my component mode, and again, notice that there's something wrong here because it's only selecting half of that edge, is that it left a bunch of vertices throughout. Okay? And in 3D, having I guess leftover vertices floating like this can be problematic for your models. So one way you can avoid that, again, let's just say I made that division and I wanted to undo it and I didn't have enough undos to do it, I would just double click on this edge to actually select that whole loop of edges. Alright, and then I will click on delete edge vertex, and notice now that the vertices of that segment that I deleted are no longer there. So again, it will be a good practice for you to start remembering this one right now, because it's going to come in handy with models you're going to be creating. Let's see, beyond this, I'm going to cover some of these other tools at another time. Let's see, so we covered the component mode, shelves, tools, how to create primitives, channel box, and again, remember that all of these have different options that you can have. Another thing that I'm going to introduce right now, again, which is pretty basic, and it helps you kind of keep your scenes organized, is the layers menu, and you're going to find that in the channel box, and again, you can find it right here. And it allows you to actually kind of keep your scenes organized. So for instance, if I have multiple objects in my scene and I wanted to just focus on, let's say, this one, but I didn't want to have anything else affecting my scene, because you know, when you have a populated scene, it becomes difficult for you to maybe be working on this one and selecting this one by accident or something like that. So you want to put those in a different layer that you can actually freeze, so you're not really manipulating those. So if I go to display, and there are two types of way that you can create layers. You can just create a new one by clicking on it. Alright, and again, notice that we have a new layer right here. If you want to give it a name, just double click on it, and I'm just going to give it a name, object 1. But again, you have to keep in mind that Maya is not very friendly to spaces. So any names that you give to your layers here needs to be kind of one-word things. So I'm going to click on Save. Alright, and that's object 1. Now, if I wanted to add this object to this layer, I can right-click on the layer and click on Add Selected Object. And now this object has been added to my layer. And if I wanted to hide it, I will click on this box, and again, notice that it's no longer visible. Now it's visible. Now it's not visible. Alright. The other way that you can create layers to keep things organized is the second way. So I'm going to select the rest of my objects. And again, if you want to select multiple things in Maya, you have to hold Shift. Okay? So by holding Shift, I'm going to select the rest of these objects. Alright? And keep in mind that that's also true for components. If you wanted to select multiple components, like multiple faces, you need to hold Shift for that. So by holding all these, I'm going to click on this one, alright, and automatically is going to put all those objects into my layer. Sorry, wrong one. Okay, and again, we can go in here and just object to this one, and I'm doing a bunch of things that I shouldn't be doing. Just call this one object 2. Now what you're seeing here is a smooth preview of that Maya does, just in case that you want to kind of see what this object is going to be like if you add some sort of smoother. Now it's not actually doing this to the geometry, it's just a preview, and again, it happened because I pressed 2 and 3 by accident. So if I just select him and press 1, it's just going to put him back the way that they originally were. If I select them and I press 2, I see a preview of the wireframe original geometry plus what it would look like if it was smoothed out. And if I press 3, it just gives me the smoothed out version. And again, 4 if you want to see things in wireframe. 5 gives you a shaded version. Okay. So, alright. So this is, again, just a basic overview of the Maya interface, how to create objects, how to manipulate them, how to add geometry, how to use some of the modeling tools, and again, mesh and edit mesh were used in this tutorial. If you want to undo things, you press Z. You can also find these commands under your edit. Alright, undo or redo. And alright, this is going to conclude this lesson, and thank you for watching.